ESLA.
I wish you could tell
Remember
us.
ESLA,
Mm-hmm.
Energy Sector Levy Act. And let me read from the 2 reports published. And it answers, whether, the questioner asks whether we foresaw, the banking sector having some problems. Just quick one, we say that the Act, which is the ESLA, consolidates existing energy sector levies, defines frameworks. One, the first objective being, to consolidate existing energy sector levies. 2, ensure the financial viability of energy sector SOEs. 3, facilitate investments in the sector. And 4, mitigate against market credit liquidity risk of energy sector SOEs and their counterpart creditor banks. Creditor banks. This is from the memo, which went to Parliament for ESLA in 2015. Now, this is from the 2016 ESLA report. 2017 ESLA report says the challenges constraint went on and on. I don't want to read everything. Okay,
so what you're saying is that you took the ESLA, one of the reasons for taking out ESLA, the energy sector levies, was that you wanted to sort of mitigate what would happen to the banks.
Not one of the reasons.
The main reason was to protect the banking sector.
Yes, so that we'll come to it.
Okay.
The debt overhang also increased the exposure of these institutions to credit and liquidity risk, and consequently impacted significantly on the balance sheets of their counterpart creditor banks. So what did we do? ESLA was not popular. In fact, there was a pledge to cancel ESLA, if you recall.
Yeah, by the NPP in the 2016
I remember
election.
we were doing this in 2015, going into the 2016, elections. A very tough decision to take, right? Okay, so what is the performance of ESLA? Okay, first of all, what did we do? With the first inflows of about $300 million, you remember the VRA debt that we restructured. We put in $250 million, I believe, upfront. I'm getting the numbers because I'll do an article on it. $250 million or so upfront to provide immediate liquidity to the banks and refinance 2 billion Ghana cedis, of energy sector debt. In the first tranche, that was done. We're talking about 2 billion was restructured. There were no bank failures, so maybe, people did not, take notice. There were 2 components: a foreign exchange component, and, and a domestic. 11 banks were involved in the negotiations, led by the president of the Institute of Bankers. We had a second term sheet to take care of the liability for Sono Nasogli and others who supplied. Mm-hmm. We provided a term sheet, right? That was 2016 before we left office. It took up to 2018, the entire 2017, for a bond to be done to address this issue. So the reason I'm saying that, let's be patient. Let me try and explain this. What is the performance of ESLA? There are 2 key components. The first one is the energy debt recovery levy, energy sector debt recovery levy. By the end of 2016, because it was passed in 2015, it had brought in 1.2. That component alone had brought in 1.28 billion Ghana cedis. This is the report. I'm looking at the official report that was submitted to Parliament.
Okay.
And these official reports that was submitted to Parliament. Mm-hmm. So I'm reading from those. Now, there's a second component, which is an enhanced road levy. Enhanced road levy. So it's not only energy. That is bringing in that brought in 1.06 billion Ghana cedis.
And what was that for?
That was to settle arrears.
To contractors?
To contractors.
Are you not limiting the reason for the banking crisis to the debts owed by governments to contractors and in the energy sector?
I will land. Let me land.
Energy sector.
Of course, the energy sector, whether we foresaw it, at the time it was the energy sector. Right. Whether we foresaw it or not, at the time it was coming out of subsidy, coming out of it was the energy sector that was posed the most risk.
So in your view at the time, it was just the energy sector and the road sector?
It wasn't just the energy sector.
Yeah, so which is why I asked the question, Mr. Terkper, respectfully, which is why I asked the question that what caused it in your view at that point, so that we can look at the entirety of issues.
We're talking about the responsibility and why. I think let's take it one after the other.
But we can only fully understand issues of responsibility if we come to terms with, okay, this is what caused it. Then we can look at what was done about what was causing it.
There was the energy sector debt. There was household and business debt. The high non-performing loans. Then, of course, there was the issues that have come out now with respect to, what was done with monies that Bank of Ghana provided to these, some of these banks, and the rest, right? But whatever the issue you are talking about, depositors' funds, because you're talking about a bank, right? So whether it's government debt, it's business debt, household debt, right? And the deposits, whether the deposits that were taken, which should have been safeguarded.
They were not safeguarded.
Were not safeguarded. I'm saying that the fundamental thing, the fundamental signal is that there's something wrong with the balance sheets of the banks, and you have to address them.
So when you saw that there was something wrong, this is what you went into. You went into ESLA.
We went into ESLA, and I'm saying, so apart from the figures for 2017, if you may, the energy debt brought in another 1.4 billion, right? And then the road levy brought in another 1.3 billion. Okay? So we can see from this that on average, and when we did a refinancing that will pay interest and principal for only 5 years, given the strength. You can see the strength of this, for the energy sector. Okay? Fast forward, the 2018 bond, besides the delays in 2017, despite the term sheet, right, extended ESLA for 10 years. Implicitly, that's what it means, because the bond is for 10 years. Now, if you are getting, and this is my humble submission, if you are getting 1.4 billion, 1.3 billion, let's take it an average 1 billion of each to address energy sector and contractors' debt. That's 2 billion annually.
Yeah.
Right? Times 10, that's 20 billion. My humble submission is that we have put in place a mechanism that could have addressed not just energy. Because how much liability are we talking about? For the total, we are
right now it's about
8,
between 8 and 10, because the figure has gone higher.
Yes, and I'm saying if with a mere inflow of 300 million, you were able to restructure 2 billion, this is a credible source. So the question is, what happened to these funds? Why were they not used to address?
Okay, and that is why you are not taking responsibility, because you feel you put measures in place to address these things.
Just as the way we put the sinking fund in place to make sure that the 750 million US dollars that we took in 2007 was paid off.
But you see,
we were addressing debt issues. That's the point I'm making.
But you see, this is where the issue is, because you are limiting the answer, respectfully, you are limiting the answer to issues of debt and non-performing loans. But those were not the only issues. As you acknowledge now, we have looked at what was happening with depositors' funds. We have looked at what was happening when it came to issuing even of licenses and the circumstances under which some of these licenses were issued. And I'll take you to the IMF Financial System Stability Assessment Update for Ghana.
What date?
2011.
Yes.
And at the time,
and there was an update in 2015.
I know. In 2015 was when there was the assets quality review. Mr. Terkper, I'll need to finish the question before you understand what I'm asking. Yes. You were at the time your deputy finance minister, board member of the Bank of Ghana, and it was said here that there are stress tests were undertaken by the team indicated that even a modern deterioration in asset quality of banks would lead to an insolvency of several banks. Gaps in frameworks for bank resolution, systemic risk analysis, and crisis management rendered the Bank of Ghana ill-equipped to deal with potential crisis. It has emerged that a number of issues that came now, that we are now seeing, came as a result of the fact that the Bank of Ghana just didn't see what was going on. You saw that there were gaps in bank resolution and frameworks in supervision. What was done at the time?
I don't think it's fair to say that we didn't see, because I'm giving you a practical example where
in one sector.
No, it's not one sector, please. But you're talking about the banking sector. All that you read is a combination of what is happening in the banking sector and the weaknesses that were in the banking sector. What you need to address first, because you're dealing with the bank, right? You see, if the advanced countries, right, had gone on the blame game and said, oh, it's Bill Clinton who allowed subprime to come, it's George Bush who allowed subprime to come and whatever, and did not put in quantitative easing and all those measures, right? I agree that those issues have to be addressed. But the question is, what do you do to protect the banks? So is that sufficient reason for not taking action for the entire 2017 when money was sitting there to blame Seth Terkper? Or what? No,
Mr. Terkper, like you are saying, it's not really about a blame game. So we are trying to understand what happened. Like you're saying, we are not here to ask questions about what happened and what you did not do and what you did do.
Okay, fair enough. Yes.
Yes. What we want to find out is that when we found out in 2011, and the IMF told us that there are issues with how we are regulating the banks, it's even stated in that report that there are issues with conglomerates being formed. And we later find in 2017, 2018 that related party transactions formed a big part of what this happened, even larger than the government debt. So when we knew that there were gaps in our regulation, gaps in what exactly we're doing to regulate these banks, what did we do to strengthen the Bank of Ghana?
Well, if you ask me, on the board, these issues came up, and they were addressed, in various ways. Okay, so you address it from the regulator's perspective, and I do not want to expand the argument. I believe that you were here in 2016 when the issue of the regulation of the oversight of the central bank came up. That debate in Akosomo and the headlines that I was fighting the IMF because of the call for oversight of the central bank, at least by parliament, as happens in many countries. When there was a call for even the deputy minister for finance to be taken off the Bank of Ghana board because of perceived political interest. And my answer, when I came to this studio and other places, I said, I was probably a better minister because I had an insight serving on the board, and that we should not look at it as just political interference. There is only one fiscal representative on the board that is about 12 or so. So what impacts would you have? The bank is protected, Monetary Policy Committee is protected, and all that. So I think we shouldn't also oversee oversight issues. Right, because it is the same fund that pushed for independence of the central bank, and arm's length from the Ministry of Finance. And
actually,
you can go back.
It's in this report. It's in this report when they said that the finance minister, for instance, should not be.
Exactly.
But then again, how did that cure the problem? Because we still have this issue here now.
Because let me answer. We have the issues because I perceived, and I lived in the U.S. and saw the global financial crisis and the effect which the banking sector can have on an economy. And I perceive that a weak balance sheet can cause havoc. And I'm saying that, and remember, the same act that we were discussing at the time was saying, the Amendment Act, and it wanted to be even strengthened, was saying that when anything happens with the central bank, it's the fiscal that has to take responsibility as shareholder. So my question is, why take, when I don't mean responsibility in that sense, I mean the fiscal, the taxpayer, has to pay for any consequence that came. Okay. Right? So we had that dichotomy where, the bank was being kept arm's length, but the liability that would arise from that arm's length will be borne, by taxpayers through the Ministry of Finance. The important thing to address, which I am saying, was that we saw in the case of energy sector, and because that is partly government liability, that there was that vulnerability, right? And so I'm saying that as far as injection of liquidity, as far as restructuring, we probably have funds beyond just the energy and road sector to have done something, And I'm saying that if on average you are getting 2 billion, and in fact, actually the inflow is 3 billion.
It's the Seth Terkper. former Minister for Finance. We talked a bit about China and Ghana's century bond, and then we talked about a $2 billion loan or barter agreement, like I said, depending on where you're standing. Now we are talking about what happened with banks. Mr. Seth Terkper has made a strong point that Ghana did not necessarily need to enter the program that it is now, because his government left a funding line which would have built up to about 30 billion cedis through the energy sector levies that they started charging in 2015. So basically, if it's a matter of the banks not having money, there was enough money being built there to bail out the banks.
Quick comment on that. I am not against restructuring. Which Bank of Ghana is engaged in. I am not against, going after what is perceived to be fraudulent deals. I don't want to comment on it because it's the courts, some of which are being challenged under expropriation constitution. No, the Bank of Ghana, and I've been on the board, and I think it would be dishonest to say that the Bank of Ghana hasn't got a responsibility, to make sure that the financial sector, remains strong. And when they see bad governance, or when they see, for example, ethics issues within the bank itself and others, sure.
Right.
So I don't think that my position, is an absolute one that, the only answer, is in the ESLA. I'm only talking about the period of inaction when probably those funds could have been mobilized to mitigate some of the problems that we are seeing.
I'm very glad you clarified that point. I'll come back to you and then we'll deal with a bit of that. But before we continue the conversation with Mr.